begin. Please remember that this meeting is being recorded. We will have these slides and these recordings available on ePlan if you need to go back at any time to review the information. Like I mentioned earlier in our general session, I'm Julia Hudson, the West Tennessee Relief Funding Coordinator, and I'm joined with Jerri Beth Nave, our East Tennessee Relief Funding Coordinator. We will be covering ESSER pre-approvals, funding applications and revisions, and monitoring in this session. We always want to start with a reminder that our Best for All strategic plan is top of mind and is driving this work. We are focused on those three core areas of academics, student readiness, and educators. And we believe that this recovery work and funding can impact these areas significantly across the state of Tennessee. As we go through our agenda, we will start with pre-approvals. We'll then talk about funding application revisions, monitoring, and then we will leave around 5 minutes for questions at the end. At that time, you can come off of mute to ask your question, or you can also just type your question in the chat. If you have questions along the way, feel free to type them in the chat as we go, and we'll address them at the end as time allows. I'm going to turn my camera off. My computer's been running a little slowly to save some bandwidth, and we will get started talking about pre-approvals. We realize that many LEAs have already completed pre-approvals. However, we also know that there are some LEAs who may still need to do a pre-approval or who may need to make revisions along the way to their authorized pre-approvals in the future. So we want to make sure that we give a few reminders and cover this topic. There are several reasons why you might need to request pre-approval. For example, the purchase of real property, equipment, or other capital expenditures. When we're thinking about things like equipment, that would mean tangible personal property, having a use life of more than 1 year, and a per unit acquisition cost typically of at least $5,000 or more. If you are completing an initiative or you're purchasing something and you are not following a competitive procurement process, you would need to ask for pre-approval in order to do that. Of course, construction projects would need pre-approval. We know this is new for a lot of us with these funds. These things, such as improvements to our land and buildings that increase value or use life, constructing new buildings, facilities, and structures, or remodeling and renovating existing building structures and facilities, are things that would require pre-approval. Land purchases and building purchases also would require pre-approval. A building purchase would include things like trailers and modular units. So for example, we know many schools have had to purchase things like trailers in order to spread students out and help with social distancing. Those items would be considered building purchases and would need to go through the pre-approval process. Capital equipment, such as vans, buses, etc., is not necessary for pre-approval. We can approve these through the funding application. Now, we have had LEAs who have requested these items in their pre-approval, which is absolutely fine. However, we just want to remind you that it's not necessary to do pre-approval for those items, as we can approve them through the funding application. We like to make sure that we remind our LEAs that if they have a question, if they are in doubt, it's best to fill it out. When in doubt, fill it out. It's better to have that pre-approval done and not end up needing it than have to wait and come back and submit it later. This delays the review process in getting our funding to LEAs. If you have questions about pre-approvals, or if you are not sure if your initiative requires pre-approval, there's a question and answer document in the TDOE resources under ESSER 3.0 and ESSER Construction that has the answers and a lot of information that's very helpful in determining whether your initiative would require pre-approval. You can always, of course, reach out to your relief funding coordinator as well. The pre-approval process has a few steps to keep in mind. First, your LEA would need to determine if any initiatives are likely to require pre-approval. Thinking about the things that you plan to spend your funds on, and then determine whether any of those items would need pre-approval. Again, use that Q&A document that I mentioned, or reach out to your coordinator if you're not sure. It's best to have it done and not need it than to need it along the way and not have it. You would then apply for your pre-approval in E-Plan, which I'll show you where to go in just a moment. Sometimes pre-approvals, just like our funding applications, may need revisions if something's not allowable or needs to be updated, or maybe we have additional questions that need to be answered. You would revise your pre-approval if needed and then submit. The pre-approval first is reviewed by our Director of Relief Funding and then is reviewed at the next level by our senior leadership for final approval. As a reminder, when you need to do a pre-approval, you would go in E-Plan under Data and Information. From there, you would choose FY21, where you will see the ESSER pre-approval request. That is where you can find the ESSER 2.0 and 3.0 pre-approval request. We know that these things were not allowable with ESSER 1.0 funds, so there's not an option for that. This is where you'll go to submit pre-approvals and revise pre-approvals. One thing I do want to point out and note is that it's important to keep in mind that any request in the pre-approval also has to make it through and be approved in the funding application. They have to be approved in both items. There's some additional reminders that are helpful when you're submitting or revising pre-approvals that we want you to keep in mind. Of course, most importantly is that clear alignment to the purpose of ESSER funds. So when we think about these funds, we know that they are to prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID-19. When determining your initiatives and what you're going to purchase with these funds, you want to make sure that it is necessary to prevent, prepare, and respond to COVID-19 so that it falls under the alignment of these funds. You also need to include a description of the anticipated benefits of your project. For example, how many students are going to be impacted? What are the main objectives of the project, etc. We also ask for a timeline. Projects requested in ESSER funding applications and pre-approvals need to be completed within the time constraints of the grant. That is very important to keep in mind, as we know that construction projects can be a lengthy process. You need to include your proposed timeline in your pre-approval. It can be as simple as saying, we're adding an addition of 6 classrooms to our elementary school to help alleviate overcrowding and promote social distancing. This will begin in January of 2022 and construction will be completed by December of 2022. Of course, you would need to include your cost. And if you're seeking pre-approval for non-competitive bid process, you would need to include justification as to why you are doing so. It's also important to remember that all responsible parties in the LEA need to review and submit. For example, if you're the ESSER director and you are listed as such an E-Plan, once you submit it, it would need to go up to the authorized representative from your LEA before it would land in our relief funding director's hands. We have seen LEAs who have drafted or submitted it, but it hasn't been sent at the next level. And so those pre-approvals have been waiting to be reviewed, but they haven't come through on our end. So it's very important to remember that everyone responsible needs to review those and submit those, as well as in the funding applications. We also ask that you clearly align your initiatives in your funding application with the language of your pre-approvals. Having alignment across all of these sections of your pre-approval, as well as all the sections of the funding application, help our team review these at much quicker, and helps us ensure that the funding application, that all the items in the funding application are allowable, without having to ask additional questions or ask for extra revisions if it's already aligned with your authorized pre-approval. For example, if your school or your LEA is requesting pre-approval to add a new wing for overcrowded classrooms and to promote social distancing, you would need to tell us, of course, we're adding 8 classrooms and 2 restrooms, how many students and teachers are impacted, and that included timeline. In the funding application, it would not be sufficient to just say, add new classrooms at John Doe Elementary. That would require the relief team to ask you additional questions and for additional information, and it slows the review process. So we ask that you make sure that those initiatives are clearly aligned. In the event that a pre-approval is denied or returned for revisions, we want to make you aware that those revisions also need to be noted in your funding application. For example, if you were told to remove something from the pre-approval, it also needs to be removed from the funding application. Along the way, you may need to make revisions to your funding application. You also may need to make revisions for your pre-approvals. If you are making an addition or a revision to your funding application and it includes something that may require pre-approval, you would need to revise your pre-approval and resubmit it as soon as possible for a timely review and approval. For example, you may need to budget additional funds for trailers that you did not foresee purchasing originally. If you request that in your funding application, it would also need to be in your revised pre-approval. One thing is important to note is if you are changing your funding application or increasing the amount of a project that was already pre-approved, those would require revisions to the pre-approval. We also ask that you note your revisions. Again, this is very helpful for us in the review process because we can identify what has been changed quickly and we can review your funding application at a much faster rate and approve it quickly. I know Jerri Beth is going to talk about that in just a moment when we talk about funding application revisions. We'll do a quick knowledge check and then we will turn it over to Jerri Beth to talk about funding applications and monitoring. Please type your answer in the chat. Where are pre-approvals found in ePlan? A, data and information, or I'm sorry, A, funding applications, B, data and information, C, the LEA document library, or D, plans. You guys are really good listeners. It is B, data and information. Our next question, construction projects do not have to be completed by the end of the grant period. Is that true or false? Yes, that is false. They do have to be completed by the end of the grant period. I'm going to turn it over to Jerri Beth to talk to you all about funding applications and revisions.
Hey, good morning again, everyone. As Julia mentioned, we're going to be going over some information about revisions to funding applications. As we move forward in the life of ESSER grants, we want to spend some time talking about some of the protocols that we would like to see when you make revisions to the funding applications. As I think Jennifer and Debbie both mentioned earlier this morning, we know that with the addition of these ESSER funds, LEAs have a variety of people who are working as administrators of the grants. Some people may have many, many years experience dealing with this kind of work. Others may be brand new to it. So we want to just go over a few things and just make sure that everyone is on the same page and that we are covering the things that are needed when revisions are made. When you make revisions, it's important to ensure that you cover all the needed changes in every section of the funding application. If you are deleting items, and or adding new ones, you need to make sure that you include those changes in both the budget narrative section as well as the spending plan section. Additionally, if you are making changes regarding your personnel, you always need to make sure that you are matching the head counts and the FTEs between the budget narratives and the personnel detail charts. And as always, we ask that you please make sure that you include all the details necessary for your changes, such as descriptions and rationales to show how the activities that you are proposing prepare for, respond to, or prevent COVID. I will discuss additional details in the following slides. When you make revisions to your applications, it is important that you note where these changes are, and this is for two important reasons. First, it helps us as reviewers to do the review quicker rather than having to review the entire funding application again to find your changes. This, of course, will help you in turn receive an approval in a quicker time period. Second, as you move forward through the life of grants, it will also help you to easily know when and where you have made changes. This will be important for future monitoring activities, possible reporting, and serves as just a good record of everything that has happened during the life of the grant. When you make changes, you can bold the text, you can highlight the text, you can underline, note the date, write the revision number, etc. Any of these things that help both you and us see these changes to track them easier is fine. Leave your old information there as well. Do not delete it. Because again, this will help everyone as you go back and look at the changes that were made throughout the life of the grant. And as always, double check your revisions before you resubmit. We have timelines that we follow when applications have been, when revisions have been submitted. We will work to adhere to these timelines when the changes are made. Within getting notice of the LEA authorized representative approval, we as relief funding coordinators will review the application within 5 business days. From there, you will receive the application back for requested revisions or corrections, or we will approve it and it will go to the next level for ESSER director approval. So our final tips that we would like you to remember for application revisions. Ensure that you have alignment and that your changes are made in all necessary sections of the funding application. Double check your personnel counts, ensure the alignment within the spending plan and the budget and your personnel detail charts. And also we have an excellent resource that you can use at any time that shows recommended line items. This is not an all-inclusive list, but it is extremely helpful both to new people who are working on these applications plus ones who have been around for many years, because we know with ESSER we're budgeting in account series that we don't typically do, such as maintenance of plant, operation of plant, capital projects. There's a link in this presentation that will be available, and it is in the ESSER resources. That is just a good resource for you to have and use as you are making revisions and working on any of these applications. Also, please remember to include as much detail as possible in your budget narratives. For example, if you are purchasing devices, include how many and how much each costs. Or if you are providing bonuses to employees, how many people does this include and how much does each receive? This helps show whether you are meeting the federal cost principles of allowable, reasonable, and necessary. We know that we are asking for a great deal of specificity in budget narratives, but this is due to, as mentioned before, these unprecedented amounts of funds that are included in the ESSER grants, particularly ESSER 3. Next slide. And as Julia mentioned earlier, when you make revisions to the application that include changes for any building or remodeling, make sure that you make the necessary changes to your pre-approval and submit that as well. And always remember, I think Julia mentioned this as well too, that everyone from the LEA end does the approvals that are needed to make sure that both your application and pre-approval are officially submitted to the department. And also, as always, please remember that you can reach out to any of us, the regional coordinators, with questions or for technical assistance as you are working on any of these revisions to the pre-approvals or the funding applications. Okay, we have a knowledge check about funding application revisions. Again, just type your answer into the chat. What is the timeline for reviewing funding application revisions? 5 business days, 3 business days, 1 business day, or 10 business days? Very good. I see everyone has answered A. It is 5 business days. And what role is the first level of review for your funding applications? Is it Director of Relief Funding, Federal Program Senior Leadership, Assistant Commissioner of Federal Programs, or Relief Funding Coordinators? Again, please type your answer in the chat. Okay, very good. Yes, it is D. It is. We relief funding coordinators who are the first reviewers of your applications. Thank you. Okay, now we are going to be moving into the last section of this session, and it is about monitoring. And I want to note that the monitoring that we are discussing in this section is about monitoring from the TDOE. This is not US Ed monitoring. It is the monitoring that takes place in Tennessee each year. I think we had a little confusion about that in our earlier session. So the types of monitoring that we have are results-based virtual on-site monitoring for at least 10% of LEAs. There's desktop monitoring for approximately 10% of LEAs, and the remainder of LEAs will complete a results-based self-assessment monitoring. The type of monitoring that an LEA receives is based on the risk assessment analysis that takes place every year. Right now, every LEA is aware of which type of monitoring they will have this year. We've had several on-site visits that have taken place already and are continuing. We know that LEAs are working on desktop monitoring as well at this time. And the self-assessment will open in January for the remaining LEAs. All 3 ESSER funds are included in each type of monitoring. At this time, the required uploads include learning loss plans, and these can be different things. And we are talking about this morning because we have had several questions from LEAs who have participated in monitoring to this point. So we are including our recommendations for what those uploads are for each ESSER fund. For ESSER 1.0, we recommend the continuous learning plan that each LEA had to complete before the 2021 school year. For ESSER 2.0, You could use either that continuous learning plan or the ESSER's public spending plan. We know you just completed this public spending plan for ESSER 3, but it does include information about ESSER 2 as well. And for ESSER 3, we do recommend that ESSER public spending plan. Now, there is additional documentation you can include, or you could use as your uploads. You can include information from your Inform TN district plan, or if your LEA has any other formal written plan that has been developed to address learning loss. As the department continues to learn about requirements from US Ed, there may be more added to monitoring instruments as we move into next year for 2022-23. With this in mind, we want to make some recommendations of things that we feel are best practices regarding documentation of your utilization of these funds. As many of you know from the administration of other federal grants, such as ESSA and IDEA, there are certain items that are typically required with federal grants. These include your purchasing processes, your inventory controls, time and effort documentation, and just general documentation of your activities that are funded by grants. We recommend that you follow these same guidelines and processes with your ESSER funds. There are some particular activities with ESSER funds that we want to encourage special attention, and these include stakeholder engagement, construction and remodeling, time and effort, and effectiveness of activities. Stakeholder engagement is a large aspect of ESSER 3.0, so it is very important that you ensure proper documentation to show your efforts in this area. Some ideas include your meeting announcements and/or invitations to the various stakeholders, your meeting agendas, any sign-in sheets, presentations, and also any communication that you have regarding your grant activities. And we also want to note that it's very important as you're conducting these activities that you're using multiple models of engagement. For example, it would be good for you to show not just that you sent a survey to your stakeholders, but that you also had maybe town hall meetings, parent meetings at schools, possibly student focus groups, just any number of ways that you can show that you are trying various ways of engaging your stakeholders to get their input. Construction and remodeling. This is a new area for us using federal funds. So we feel like this is an area in which you should pay particular attention in ensuring that the federal guidelines are followed. Items like the bid process shouldn't be new at all to finance departments, but it's important that everyone does know and is aware what your particular bid guidelines are in your LEA and that they are being adhered to. When work is contracted, you want to know that your contractors are following the Davis-Bacon Act. One promising practice that we have learned this year from Monroe County during monitoring is that they have contractors actually sign their contracts ensuring that they will follow the act. You may also want to have employees involved in construction and remodeling projects trained regarding the federal guidelines. We know that many people completed the Brustein training that was offered earlier this year, but you may want to include this information with more people who were not able to attend that training. Also, you want to keep a close eye on your timelines. We all know that these projects are lengthy and that particularly at this time, supply and demand issues may come into play. So always remember the dates for when all ESSER funds must be obligated, which are June 30th, 2023 for ESSER 2, and June 30th, 2024 for ESSER 3. Time and effort. We know that many LEAs are utilizing these grant funds to pay stipends, bonuses, extra hourly wages for employees. It is important to note that there should be some record of these activities, whether they be timesheets or statements of extra duties, and also ensure that these documents have the proper signatures, which would include the employee and at least the direct supervisor. Effectiveness of activities. This is another important area for you to show that you are tracking the effectiveness of the activities from which you are funding through ESSER dollars. In the ESSER 2 and 3 applications, you write how the effectiveness will be assessed. We recommend that you have written procedures of this. Who is responsible for tracking which activities? What data will be utilized? We know that there are many assessments that will help you track learning loss, such as benchmarks, progress monitoring, and summative T and Ready data. But how are you tracking things like the addition of social workers or behavior specialists who may be working with students with mental health issues? How are you tracking the effectiveness of new HVAC units? A lot of these activities are new and different than what we have done before. So just make sure that you have a specific method of tracking how effective the activities are. Okay, we will do one more knowledge check, but I'd like to add one other thing. Again, the items I just covered are recommended. We do not know for certain what additional guidance USAID may provide regarding monitoring moving into the future. These are our recommendations based on best practices, what we know from other federal grants, and just what we feel like should be followed as we move forward. Okay, one final knowledge check, and this should be an easy one. Every LEA will be monitored for ESSER in 21-22. Is this true or false? Please answer in the chat. Yes, it is true. Thank you very much. And now I will turn it back over to Julia to close things out for us. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jerri Beth. We have a few minutes, so we will take some time to address any questions that you may have. I think we only had one in the chat that we answered. But if you have any additional questions, you can come off of mute, or you're also welcome just to type your question in the chat, and we'll answer as many as we can as time allows before we end our session for the day. You all must have really listened. We must have explained ourselves very well during this session. I haven't seen any questions pop up. But if you think of a question in the next few minutes as we're wrapping up, please feel free to pop that in the chat. Of course, you can always reach out to us, via email or call us as well. Oh, I think I see a question. Let's pull up the chat. All right. So we have a question. Does ESSER 3 allow us to use a construction manager for building projects? So is that referring to using ESSER 3 funds to hire a construction manager or to pay a stipend for a construction manager?
I do believe that would be allowable under ESSER 3.
Okay, yes, yes. Like Jerri Beth said, I think that would be allowable, yes. I know we've had some LEAs mention that they were using, paying additional funds or paying a stipend to like a maintenance personnel to manage those projects and track that process. Thank you for that question. If you have more questions, feel free to pop those in the chat. We have just a few other things I want to make sure we cover before we end for the day and you all get started on your Friday. So these sessions are being recorded. These slides and recordings will be available in ePlan in the TDOE resources section under relief funding. That's where you can also find the Q&As and other documents we mentioned, those line items and things like that. We'll also have that TDOE webpage with some links about ESSER as well. Okay, I saw another question in the chat about the upcoming stakeholder engagement. Can districts get feedback on just the addendums, or do we need to get feedback on the entire spending plan? Thank you, Jerri Beth. It will be just the addendums moving forward. Please keep in mind that we will have office hours. These are in addition to those regular FPO office hours that we offer on Mondays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, starting next week, December 6th, and we'll alternate between morning and afternoon. We encourage you to attend those office hours to ask any questions or just to listen in and get insight from other LEAs and other stakeholders. To make these really beneficial, as we talked about with Debbie earlier, that data collection from US Ed, we know that's going to be a big piece and we'll probably have a lot of questions around that. So please bring those questions to office hours. That will really help make those office hours beneficial for everyone, and we'll compile those questions and ideas into a document in ePlan as well. I want to share Jerri Beth and my contact information. I am for West Tennessee and Jerri Beth is East Tennessee, but you can reach out to us via email or phone. I also wanted to mention Preston Gaunter, who I know many of you worked with on those public plans. Preston contracts with us and he could not be here today, but he is a wealth of knowledge. He knows everything I think about federal funding. So he's also very helpful as well. If you're not sure who your relief funding coordinator is, this map is very helpful. I cover West Tennessee, Morgan covers Middle, Jerri Beth is East Tennessee, and then Jennifer, our director, covers those 20 largest districts. And if you email the wrong person, we'll send you to the right one, so don't worry about that. One thing we do want to ask before you end for the day, we would really appreciate if you would take a quick survey for us. It's only a minute or two long. I think Jerri Beth just dropped a link in the chat. You can also use the camera on your phone to use the QR code, but this would be really helpful for us to get some feedback on this professional development day and to help us plan for PD in the future that would be relevant and helpful to our LEA. So we really appreciate you guys taking just a minute to fill that survey out for us. We'll skip this part because you are done with your sessions for the day. Okay. We do want to tell everyone thank you for joining us and taking time to listen and learn with us. I think we all recognize that this has been a lot of learning for everyone involved, people who have been involved in federal programs for years and those who are new. This is just, a whole new beast with ESSER. And so we appreciate how hard everyone has been working to learn and to make those adjustments necessary with us throughout this process. So we just want to tell you, thank you so much. We know that, it's been a really difficult couple of years for everyone in education, and we're really appreciative of how hard you all have worked on this. Please reach out to us at any time if you need assistance, if you have questions. We're happy to help with anything we can along the way. And we hope you have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend, and have a very happy and restful, because I'm sure you all need it, holiday season. Thank you all so much.
Thank you all.